These are 5 reasons why babies should be baptized. The 5th reason is because throughout Scripture, God shows a special care for infants and children, and he always includes them within his gracious promises. And we see this throughout the Old Testament, that God gives the promise to Abraham, and he gives the gift of circumcision to Abraham, which is the sign of the promise that God gave to Abraham, that he was going to inherit this special land, that he was going to have all of these children, these great descendants, and all of the Abrahamic promises were sealed with this great gift of circumcision, which serves as a sign of God's promise and intention to fulfill that promise to Abraham. And Abraham was not just told, you get circumcised when you're old enough, then wait till your kids are old enough and they believe the promise too, and as soon as they believe the promise, then you get them circumcised. No, but instead, he was told that he was to circumcise his children. And so the children are circumcised and the infants are circumcised. When a family is brought into the covenant of the people of God in the Old Testament, the entire family, at least the males in the family, receive the gift of circumcision. And we are told in the book of Colossians that baptism is now the great fulfillment of circumcision. And in that act of holy baptism, the infants, why would they not be brought into the covenant as well? One of the things we see is that in the Old Covenant, things are less inclusive. They are more exclusive than they are in the New Covenant. In other words, the New Covenant brings in more people instead of excluding people. So while circumcision was something that was only received by the males, for example, baptism now in the New Covenant is received by both males and females. Circumcision was for the Jews and those who would submit to Jewish law. And now baptism is for all people of all nations, as Christ says in the Great Commission. And so if that's the case, the pattern is always from a more exclusive group to a more inclusive group, then of course the infants would remain. There's no reason to assume that God now says, now infants aren't included. And if God did do that, he'd have to be pretty explicit, because if you're circumcising your family, you're thinking in terms of family, guess what? When baptism comes along, that's just what you're going to do, unless you are told explicitly that something has changed. And Scripture is so clear about the inclusion of children. When the children are brought to Jesus, the infants are brought to Jesus, as we're told in the Gospel of Luke specifically, that he wants to lay his hands on them, he wants to bless them, and he wants to give them the kingdom of heaven. He says, to them, to such belong the kingdom of heaven. So who are we to say that infants can't be included in God's gracious promises, which are received in holy baptism?